Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Just doing a video on an engine that I rebuilt a few years ago for a friend. This is a 3 litre SC with the big ports. So it was running, but it was running a bit poorly and it had a lot of oil leaks. And in a few minutes you're going to see the extent of those oil leaks. So we're just looking at the underside here. It's still got the original oil return and the original heat exchangers. You can now see some of the leaking here from the pressure switch and the oil thermostat, and that was the triangle of death as everyone refers to it. So you can see that the warm-up regulator was actually rebuilt at some point, and I think it was before the owner acquired the car. And here you can see some of the sleeving for the fuel lines it's just all crumbled and disappeared. This is the chain tensioner line at the back of the engine, so you can see how much of oil is leaking there from the pressure sender. And in general, this was a very grubby kind of an engine. You can see some new fuel hoses here as well. So I'm not too sure when that was done. So I like to take lots of photos around the engine during the disassembly, just as a bit of a record, and also to show the owners what I find along the way. The CIS injection system has been taken off the car at this point, and I believe the owner, he actually refurbished it himself. He cleaned it up and put new gaskets and seals and whatnot. You can actually see the harness there has actually been stripped a little bit. All the heat shrink has come off the harness. The spark plugs are nice and dirty, which is always good fun. And back to the triangle of death, you can actually see a pool of oil on the top of the engine. And quite often you'll find that the rubber O-ring on the external thermostat has hardened and turned to plastic, and they just don't do anything there. So you've got a lot of pressure coming through there. So between that and the oil breather hose leaking, you get a huge mess, as you can see right here. And with the build-up of oil, you've got the fan blowing all the air through to cool the engine, so that just traps all the dirt. A bit like oiling a K&N air filter, the oil traps the dirt, and it just builds up and builds up and builds up, and then before you know it, all of your cooling fins get blocked, and then you're not having very much cooling. This is at the end of the engine. You can see a lot of paper and leaves that have been trapped in there, so again, this does compromise the cooling of the engine, so it's not a good idea. This is just near the oil pressure sender at the rear of the engine, and again you can see lots of leaks. Obviously all of this gets fixed and replaced, and underneath the engine again, heaps and heaps. You can see that this engine did have the air injection on the exhaust ports, and someone's already removed that system, which is a good thing. And someone else, when it was rebuilt before, when they pulled the heat exchangers off, they've broken the top fin on the heads, and I think 3 or 4 of these heads were damaged this way, which is a bit of a shame, but that's what happens when you don't have the right tooling, or you are a bit ham-fisted and you just don't know what's going on. The original oil relief plugs are in there, which are a pain, so they'll be replaced with hex plugs, or at least I hope they are. As I said, it was a few years ago that I built this. So it's kind of fun to sort of go back and look at an old engine that I've built, just to see what I did and what was replaced. Here we go, the crankshaft pulley seal. Obviously it's not doing its job very well anymore, so a good time for everything to be refurbished. Intermediate shaft cover plate. I think most of that oil is actually coming from the seal. Now looking at the flywheel seal, what's interesting here is whoever's put this one in has put a little bit of sealant. I think that's like a blue RTV, or is it blue Hylomar? Whether it's just that spot, it doesn't look like they've put it around the entire engine. But yeah, again at the bottom you can see some of the sealant. So I mean, when I put these flywheel seals in, I don't use any sealant at all. I install them completely dry. And I just hope for I expect the seal to do the job. Not sure what I'm photographing here, probably just the location of the hanger for the oil pipe. onto the camshaft. So you can see some pitting now. I think these cams had a lot of pitting. So there's one lobe that's got a lot of pitting. And this happens when, well, this one's quite bad. This is what happens when you don't really use the correct oil, or you do infrequent oil changes, because there's a lot of pressure from the springs on those lobes. So again, that's a pretty bad one. And as you can imagine, the metal doesn't just disappear into thin air. It goes into the oil and it runs through the rest of your engine eventually. Hopefully the filter filters it out, but it's not a good thing. So I'm pretty sure we replaced these cams. Yeah, look at that. So lots and lots of pitting on multiple lobes. The rocker arms were refurbished as well, but I don't know if I took any photos of that. So sort of half a long block on the engine stand. Just, God, it looks, it's in a sorry state, but look how dirty it is. And hopefully you'll be impressed by the transformation later. Here we go. Head stud's out. And you can see the bottom right hand head stud is actually broken, and it seems to always be the Dilava studs on the exhaust side. Crankshaft is out. I'm not sure what I was photographing here, probably just having a look at the journals and the orientation of the rods. Yep, so you can see the stamps on the parting faces, and also I think I described a number 3 on there as well. Now, these bearings came out of the case. So journal number 7 for the main crankcase bearings was absolutely rotten. This is the crank. This is where the bearings were supposed to be operating. But I can tell you right now, those bearings weren't doing anything. When I split the case, I remember the bearings fell out of the case onto the floor. I'm surprised that the crankshaft wasn't damaged, because the bearings were absolutely trashed. And as it turned out, if you look at number 7 there on the right hand side, just next to number 8, it's seen a lot of heat. That journal's seen a lot of heat, and the aluminium has actually deformed and distorted so much that the bearing just fell out. Now, I've never seen that before. This is the first time I've seen it. And this engine did require a lot of work from the machine shop to bring the case back into spec, so that we could use standard bearings again, which involves basically a line bore and clipping of the cases. I'm just looking at the camshaft towers here just before I send them off to be cleaned. That's just another photo of the journal that was scored. That's number 7, and and this crankshaft actually did come back to being pretty much in perfect condition. Here's some of the rods. Just taking note of the wear on the rods. Every time I pull one of these apart, there's always some wear on the rod bearings. This one's not too bad. It's not too, it's not right down to the base metal, but yeah, you can see it's gone through a couple of the sacrificial layers there. And one of the things you'll find is if your rods become a little bit too loose on your crankshaft, well, firstly you've got to remember that the crankshaft is what sort of dictates the angle of the rod pushing up into the piston. But also if the clearances become too loose, you end up having basically 6 little oil leaks, and you can have low oil pressure. These are the original pistons. They're the low 8.5 to 1. Look at all that carbon on there. And again, because this was a budget build, he wanted to keep using the original pistons. They measured within spec. Believe it or not, the pistons are measured within spec, so we just got new rings and gapped the rings. The cylinders were a different story, and you'll see some photos in a minute, I hope. Oil pump being pulled apart to make sure there's no obvious damage. The housing actually looks good. I don't believe there was anything wrong in this one. So after it was given a good clean, the pump was put back together and torqued to spec, and making sure that it was, turning freely. So one of the things I've been doing is using various suppliers for outsourcing things like vapor blasting, and on the left is a really good one, and on the right is a different supplier. I won't say a bad one, because it's not bad, but you find that different people tend to use different media, different water pressures, different air pressures, and they do get a very different result. So I was just taking some photos from different suppliers, you can actually see inside that barrel the lining has got quite a few imperfections. So these did have to be sent away to get re-nickel sealed and recoated. So coming up you'll see some of the intake runners. So I think the one, the lighting's not good here, but I think the one on the left was the good one and the one on the right was the not so good one, but let's try again. So this is a fairly good one. You can see the nice luster. It's nice and bright. Whereas on this one, you can see it's clean, like he's done a nice cleaning job, but there's no luster at all. So they're going to oxidise and they're going to weather quicker. And here we go, here's a nice side by side. So the bad one's on the left, bad, I shouldn't say bad, but the better one is on the right hand side. And here's all the other components which were vapor blasted. And just for reference, I do remove the splash tubes from the camshaft towers with each build. I do know some people send their parts away to be vapor blasted and they leave the splash tubes inside the camshaft towers. I honestly don't know how they sleep at night. I would rather not do it. So all the parts are laid out nicely. Again, this okay, here we go. So you can see the damage, and I think 2 or 3 of the cylinders had this sort of damage, and it looks like it's where it's been sitting. Moisture's gotten into it, or maybe there was a fuel additive put in there or whatnot, and it's reacted with the Nickersil. I have seen that before, so these were sent off to be recoated. So here's the crankcases after a little bit of cleaning, or a lot of cleaning actually. And again, I do not send these away to be vapor blasted or media blasted, because it's just not worth the risk of getting media lodged inside the oil galleries inside the engine. I just don't know people that can pull the plugs and actually get to all of the media in there. So I don't believe it's worth running that risk. And this is that journal number 7. So this is after the machine shop has spent a long time clipping the cases and the machining everything back to stock. So we were able to avoid having to use the expensive oversized on the back bearings. We were able to save the case and use the original bearings, so we kept the costs down, because I think the oversized bearings are something like $1,300 to $1,400. You can only get them from Porsche, so we were able to use normal bearings. After the case was done, I did sort of do some mock-up photos, just for the client, just putting a torch through there. I just thought it was kind of a cool effect. You get to see the bluish kind of a tinge and a halo. Yeah, it looks pretty cool. So it looks like I've got the main bearings mounted in the case, and I'm hoping, oh no, we're showing more of these photos. I don't think we need to see these photos anymore. So here we have the crankshaft, so blowing out the crankshaft, lots of brake cleaner, lots of parts cleaner, lots of compressed air, and get it to be absolutely squeaky clean. New rod bolts, rods have been resized and also rebushed. And the rods are now assembled on the crankshaft. And in this particular case, this is before I had the crankshaft holding tool, but I just used the flywheel. So the crankshaft is now mounted back into the case along with the oil pump. And I don't know if you can tell, but the crankshaft has had a micro polish, and the journals are absolutely perfect and all measured well within spec. So pretty happy with that result. So now we've got the case halves together. I didn't take any photos of applying the sealant or anything like that, but the case halves are together. Just got my tools in there to hold the chain up so that it doesn't bind. And now it's time to start putting the through bolts through with the O-rings. Or did I take more photos? Here we go, short block done. And I think you'll agree it's a little bit cleaner than it was when we first started. And again, being a budget conscious build, I didn't spend ages with a a wire brush or a brass brush to clean it up. New steel studs. So yeah, on standard builds I use standard steel studs. You'd be surprised how much horsepower they can contain. And, you know, if you're only pushing out between 200 and 300 horsepower, standard steel studs are more than adequate. I think you'll agree that the engine does look pretty good here. All 24 studs are in, and overnight I always wrap them up to make sure that no dust or bugs or anything crawl inside. But yeah, it's always good to make sure that you keep everything as clean as possible. So the barrels have come back from being replated, pistons have been ultrasonic cleaned, rings are gapped, everything's mounted ready to go. And now we skip to showing everything mounted. So you can see the pistons are oriented with the hump on the left hand side to help with the CIS, with the fuel distribution. And with the vapor blasted cylinders, it does start to look pretty impressive. The heads were an interesting thing. I mean, I think we saw earlier that one of the cylinders, or probably multiple cylinders, had some water damage or corrosion. And you'll see now in this next photo that one of the heads, the valve seat, had a heap of corrosion. Like, look at that. So yeah, some new valve seats were fitted into this one. They don't always get new valve seats. The machine shop is quite sensible in their approach. If you want to spend money when you don't need to, they'll happily take it. But sensibly, you can just replace items that are out of spec. So here's my little mate. It's my little magpie friend who's been coming to visit me every once in a while, but unfortunately she's no longer with us. So it's almost a long block. So the heads are on, barrels are on, everything's torqued down, so it's being wrapped up and put away for the night. And here's one of the tests I do with the camshafts, just to make sure that the camshaft does rotate freely while everything's torqued down. So with the chain boxes, I always dress the parting surfaces just to make sure that we get a nice clean seal, and it reduces any chance of a leak. It doesn't mean that it's not going to leak. I mean, all of my engines don't leak when they're freshly built, and they don't leak for quite a while. I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now, and so far I haven't been told of any that are leaking. But again, we all know that they're all going to leak eventually. So we've got the old pulley on. I don't think I took any photos of camshaft timing, did I? Let's see, did I? No, I didn't. So cams have been timed. The vapor blasted chain covers are now on. Engine cooling tins are in. Rockers are in. Looking like an engine again, isn't it? So I do take quite a few photos for people that choose me to rebuild their engines. I like to document it. They're given a USB or a link to download all of their photos, so they can reference them at any time or ask questions. But yeah, they're a pretty good looking engine. I think they're pretty impressive. So obviously all new hardware for the valve covers, new oil lines as well. It's not worth reusing old ones to save 40 or 50 bucks. Just replace it. If you're going to do it right. It's a shame we have to ruin it by putting the CIS back on. So yeah, the shroud's been cleaned up. New oil pressure sender, as you can see. The muffler's been cleaned up by the owner. And the fan and the housing have been vapor blasted. And all engine tins have been powder coated as well. So we are getting close to bolting everything together. These are the old injector sleeves and the old injectors, so they were all punched out of the intake runners and replaced. All new O-rings, of course, because the O-rings turn to plastic. And the most important thing with these engines is you need to get a good airtight seal. So there it is, all assembled, ready to go back home and jump back into the car and start giving the owner many, many more years of enjoyment. So thanks for watching, and please check out some of my other videos. If you like this one, don't be afraid to click the like button. It would be greatly appreciated.